Christ. And so this is why I am so thrilled that there's going to be an opportunity on Pentecost Sunday, June 4th, to begin to focus some time and attention on that. But tell us a little bit more about the event and how we can get involved.
Well, thank you, Kirby. This started a year ago, actually, when Reach Beyond, formerly HCJB Global, and a number of other like-minded organizations just expressed their desire to raise the awareness of the North American church for the cause of the unreached around the world. And it's always been a part of the American church tradition to be concerned about reaching the uttermost parts of the earth with the gospel. And a little bit of that zeal has been lost lately, so let's raise the awareness of this. So we're communicating through shows like yours, Kirby, and radio stations and churches throughout the country to encourage people to become aware of the 2.5 billion people around the world that have yet to hear the name of Jesus, about the 4,000 people groups where there's no missionary, no church, no printed Bible, and to encourage people to become aware of and to pray for and give to and maybe go to some of the people that have never heard the name of Jesus. So we decided to use Pentecost Sunday, very apropos, because in the first century, that was the birth of the church when the Holy Spirit visited the church, and people from all around the world in Jerusalem heard the gospel in their own language for the first time.
Well, again, this is just an exciting opportunity. We have a link to the dayfortheunreached.org, but you don't have to necessarily spell it out, because if you just click on the See More next to the picture of Wayne Pederson, it will take you to that website. And this is one of the resources I wanted to maybe quote from for just a minute. Some of these are things that you could put into a bulletin or put up on a screen. As you point out, 500 known people groups with no Christian presence and no one reaching out to them. Another one example, 70,000 people who die every day without Christ. This certainly is a very critical issue, and I think it is exciting that you've been able to mobilize so many different churches, groups, and Christian organizations to really focus on this particular day. So what would this look like if I have a pastor, a deacon, an elder, a Bible fellowship leader, a small group leader, Sunday school leader who says, okay, we want to get involved? What is available, and how can they begin to implement some of this?
Well, as you mentioned, Kirby, thank you. A dayfortheunreached.org has a number of resources. There are videos there that tell the story of different people groups that in different countries where there is no gospel witness. There's a Bible study and prayer guide where you can become aware of some of the unreached people groups around the world, and also begin to pray specifically for some of the, not just God reach the world with the gospel, but pray specifically about countries like Thailand, which is 0.5% Christian, heavily Buddhist, Indonesia, the largest, most populous Muslim country in the world, and to begin to pray specifically for people groups without the gospel. So they can, first of all, become aware of and begin to pray for. This is not about money, but it is about connecting people with organizations like Bibles for the World and Partners International and Missio Nexus and other organizations whose prime focus is unreached people groups. And then some of us can go. Some of us that are early retirement or near retirement or even college students. We need accountants, we need IT people, we need doctors and nurses and dentists and bricklayers, and there are all kinds of needs where you can go and serve the unreached people, not necessarily proclaiming, but demonstrating God's love in very tangible ways. So those are some of the levels, Kirby, that people can get involved and just answer Christ's call to take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth, those that have never heard. His passion was to seek and to save those that are lost.
One of the action items I want to give to my listeners today, and we do this quite often, is for you to watch a video, then click the share button, and then put it on your Facebook page, or maybe put a link to it in a Twitter tweet, or maybe send it as an email to maybe somebody in leadership in your church. We have that right now at the dayfortheunreached.org. The video is about 1.5 minutes long, so it won't take you long to watch it. At the end, then, click on that share button, that little arrow, and put it it somewhere so that you can start a conversation, and so that people will begin to circle that date, June 4th, Pentecost Sunday. So begin to think about some of the resources, and then they can go to that website and they can download a number of things under the banner which says resources. There are a number of different PDF files that will be helpful to them there. Some are for a bulletin insert, some that are a FAQ kind of area. There's a Facebook cover image that you can use. So I want to encourage you, as you're listening to this today, we're going to spend a few more minutes with Wayne Pederson on it after the break, to take this and to multiply that, to make sure that people in your church are aware of that, and that, as we've mentioned before, what a great opportunity for you to go and maybe share Christ with people that have never heard it before. I've shared on this program one of my colleagues going into a village in a remote area, and I won't mention the country, although it's not that dangerous, I guess. And at the end of talking about Jesus, the men in the village said, well, this Jesus, he seems very interested. Which one of you men is Jesus? Which shows you how unreached many of these groups are. So let's take a break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about the International Day for the Unreached. If by chance you have a question, we'll keep Wayne Pederson here, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to ask him a question, we'll come back and give you a few more facts and figures right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When Brett Stevens wrote his first column to the New York Times last month, he caused quite a stir. If writing a column could be compared to a football game, Stevens was a smart quarterback who caused the opposition to jump off sides. The title of the column was The Climate of Certainty. He began by reminding us that most pundits were certain that Hillary Clinton would be our next president. He also reminded us that the campaign placed too much faith in the power of models and algorithms. He concluded that there's a lesson to this. He said, we live in a world in which data conveys authority, but authority has a way of descending into certitude, and certitude begets hubris. Then he turned to the subject of climate change. When he applied some of the same lessons to that scientific discussion and debate, he acknowledged that you can almost hear the heads exploding. He was correct. Heads did explode. Twitter comments came fast and furious. There was a campaign to cancel subscriptions to the New York Times. In his column, he makes it clear that he does not deny climate change or the possibility of the severity of its consequences, but he says ordinary citizens have the right to be skeptical of an overweening scientism. That didn't stop critics from completely misrepresenting what he wrote. The headline in Slate said that the column was classic climate change denialism. Think about that. A columnist who does not deny climate change is still charged with being a climate change denier. The reaction to his column proves his point. Stevens was calling for humility and warning about hubris. The Twitter posts, the angry letters to the editor, the campaign to cancel subscriptions, and the misrepresentation of his position illustrate the stridency and illogic of the other side. His column forced liberals to jump off sides. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Wayne Pederson. And again, we're talking about the International Day for the Unreached. Paul Eshelman, who is with the Jesus Film Project, said, "For more than 30 years, God has allowed me to be a part of reaching those who have never heard the name of Jesus. But in a world of increasing chaos, I believe we must renew and ignite our efforts like never before. By God's grace, the Jesus Film has been seen by countless millions, and now technology enables us to reach people who otherwise may never hear the good news. By participating in the International Day for the Unreached, you are taking a stand to say, together we will declare his name to the ends of the earth. Please join me in supporting this critical event. Perhaps together we can fulfill the Great Commission in our generation." Right now, what we're finding is that even though we talk a lot about reaching the unreached people groups, if this PDF that I've got in front of me, Wayne, is any indication, only about 5% of full-time Christian workers are actually working among unreached people groups, and only about 1% of the dollars given by Christians actually go to reaching the unreached. So obviously we need to change some of those percentages, don't we?
Well, you're absolutely right, Kirby, and I like to explain it this way. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked as the gospel has gone to Africa and Latin America and Asia. It's some of the fruit that's high up on the tree that's hard to reach, that has yet to be reached, and is in many ways the most ripe fruit is at the top, the difficult to reach. So this is where we're looking at some of the dangerous places where there's most opposition and resistance to the gospel. And in fact, you talk about dangerous places where you put your life on the line for following Jesus, let alone serving him or proclaiming the message. So we do need to refocus our energies, and this is where an organization like Global Mapping and the Joshua Project, which we're working with very closely, is helping us as mission agencies and as church mission boards to focus on places that are under-resourced and unengaged and untouched by the gospel. So it is a change in strategy and a focus on those areas where there is no visibility to the gospel at all.
Well, and again, we're talking about what some people call gospel-resistant parts of the world. And as you point out, I love the illustration. We've picked the low-hanging fruit, which we can find in those open countries. A lot of these closed countries are Muslim countries. Some of them are communist countries. Some of them have dictatorships. So it's going to require a lot more creativity, maybe tent-making kind of missionary outreaches and those kinds of things. So what have people like the Joshua Project and the International Missions Board of the Southern Baptist and the Issachar Initiative and others come up with as how we're going to be able to accomplish this in the 21st century?
Well, a lot of it, Kirby, is, we like to go in and declare the gospel through radio or through preaching or teaching. But in many cases, we go in and demonstrate the love of Christ through community development, education, healthcare, community development type efforts. And that slogan that I love so much, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So we see people going into some of these closed countries where there's great resistance, but they begin to demonstrate the love of Christ through medical work, dental work, community development, and Jesus cared about people's temporal needs as well as their eternal welfare. So it's appropriate that we follow him by caring for people's physical needs as well as their eternal state. So that's part of the strategy of many of these groups where we go in and demonstrate God's love before we have the opportunity to verbally declare God's love.
Let's see if we can, too. We've been talking to pastors and Sunday school leaders and the rest. Of course, everyone I would encourage to go to, again, the International Day for the Unreached website that we just mentioned a minute ago, and we'll give that out again, dayfortheunreached.org. But speak, if you might, for just a minute as a fellow broadcaster to some of the radio stations. We broadcast this program in 42 different states, and there are a lot of radio stations and station owners and managers and others listening right now. What can they do to maybe mobilize this in their own communities where there's listeners?
Well, there are resources on the website. There are some PSAs, public service announcements, that stations can carry. We're very happy to do more interviews like this on individual radio stations to raise the awareness of listeners. There's going to be a podcast on June 4th. It's actually going to be on Facebook Live. It's a live video podcast. It will feature Phil Stacey's music And our speaker will be David Platt, head of the International Mission Board and author of the book Radical. And it's going to be a wonderful time when the heads of these various coalition members are going to be talking about their missions and what they're doing and what the needs are around the world. So be watching for that on Pentecost Sunday on Facebook Live. And that'll, of course, be live, but it'll also be posted there. So radio stations can run the spots, do interviews, point to the Day for the Unreached webcast, and all of that will help make our radio listeners aware of this. A lot of what we do at Reach Beyond is radio. We've planted about 500 community radio stations around the world that are pouring out the message of Christ, all staffed locally by people that know the language, know the culture, and they're already there. So radio is a huge part of our initiative to reach the unreached.
For sure. And while we're mentioning that, I understand that you also have a 30-day prayer movement for the unreached, also a manifesto for the unreached, and of course we mentioned some of those download resources. So those are some other ways in which churches, individuals, radio stations, managers, and all can get involved. True?
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier prayer groups or care groups. There is that 30-day Bible study and prayer guide that a group can use, and they pray as a group for the needs of the unreached people groups around the world. So, I invite you. There's just a trove of resources there that people can get at dayfortheunreached.org, either to use as individuals or as small prayer groups or as churches. There are sermon outlines that pastors can use as a guideline to help talk about. We hope that on Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, June 4th, many pastors will be drawing the attention of their people to the cause of the unreached and the Great Commission.
We've talked about pastors speaking to this issue of the persecuted believers because of the World Summit in defense of the persecuted Christians. We'll talk more with Michael Yosef about that tomorrow. But let me encourage you pastors to get those sermon outlines. Those of you that want to join with the prayer movement for the unreached, there's also a manifesto for the unreached. There are all sorts of resources, which include everything from bulletin inserts as well as frequently asked questions so that you can begin to answer questions that you might have or others might have. So if nothing else, go to dayfortheunreached.org, and your assignment today is to watch the video. It's only going to take you about a minute and a half, and then click on it so that you can send it to someone or post it on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed or something of that nature. Get a conversation going. So Wayne Pederson, always great to be with you, and thank you so very much for heading up this International Day for the Unreached.
Well, and thank you for understanding the cause. Appreciate all the homework you've done on this, Kirby, and bringing Jesus' last words to his followers were to take the gospel here, there, and everywhere. And as followers of Jesus, that's what we want to be doing in the 21st century as well. Thanks, Kirby.
Well, again, more than 2 billion, 2.5 billion basically, that have never actually heard the name of Jesus. We need to change that and to recognize that we spend very little time, energy, and resources in this regard. And so pay attention to what is coming down the pike, and especially mark that date, June 4th, Pentecost Sunday, and that will be an opportunity for you to find a little bit more. Again, the website is dayfortheunreached.org. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a couple of issues in the news. A little bit later, we'll have James Paris join us in studio, and again, I hope that you will take the time to focus on the two issues we've been talking about in the last couple of days. One, the plight of persecuted believers around the world. Such an important time. And again, at that summit last week, you had Franklin Graham and Vice President Mike Pence, my own pastor Jack Graham, and others speaking there as well, Ravi Zacharias, a variety of others. And then this, the International Day for the Unreached. And if you want to know a little bit more, you can, of course, find that at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though, and when we come back, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at a Supreme Court non-decision, which I think is of concern. Sometimes when the court decides not to decide, it's as important as when they do decide to decide. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about a few of the commentaries and other issues that we've been posting here and spend a little bit of time getting your phone calls and comments. Then in the second hour, as I mentioned, James Paris will be in studio with us. Really appreciate his practical look at economics. You know, sometimes we talk about, well, you need to get out of debt. Okay, but I'm in debt and I got credit card debt. Well, James Paris will say, well, I know where you can get a much lower interest rate on your credit card. You might say, well, I've really tried to cut my budget as much as I can, tighten my belt. I can't tighten it anymore. So how can I do that? Well, he will have some ideas using the internet on how to make a difference and bring new income in. So I love his practical suggestions, and so we'll have him here for the last hour of the program today, and we'll open up the phone so that you'll get a chance to chat with him and get his advice. Looking forward to that opportunity, and you can find out more about everything we're talking about today on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at inourhands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. Pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Let me get into a couple of issues in the news, and the first one I want to talk about is the decision today by the Supreme Court to not hear a very important case involving North Carolina's voter ID law. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this may be just simply postponing a decision that will come later on. As we've pointed out, there are usually a couple of things surrounding some of these issues, and one is that only about 80 cases a year are taken by the Supreme Court at most. That means 99% of all cases never make their way to the Supreme Court. So in some respects, it's not that unusual that the Supreme Court here decided not to hear the case. But it is an important case. It would be an opportunity for the court to finally determine once and for all whether or not a voter ID is discriminatory or not. But nevertheless, they did not take the case. And as we've pointed out before, Supreme Court 101, it takes 4 justices to take a case, 5 to win. And instead, the Supreme Court for now was willing to let stand a lower court opinion from last summer, which struck down North Carolina's voter ID law. It was basically challenged by some civil rights group. But what I found so disturbing is that the court, in reviewing that, said that the law targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. No, it didn't. If you need a voter ID, as a matter of fact, some of the individuals that have been promoting voter ID are African Americans. The best example is the leader of that movement there in the state of Rhode Island. And so many times they recognize that this is not a burden upon individuals that are Latino or African American or whatever. If nothing else, this is an opportunity to make sure that your vote counts and other people can't steal your vote away from you. But the case was more complicated in part because the North Carolina's new governor, that is the Democrat Roy Cooper, wanted to dismiss the appeal which had been filed by the previous governor, that's the Republican Pat McCrory. So in some respects, it was a little bit more confused, and so it is quite possible that there will be an opportunity in the future for the court to address this issue of voter ID. But if we didn't have this particular case, I wouldn't bring up the issue of voter ID other than the fact that, first of all, I wrote a commentary not so long ago based upon, again, an action that was taken in the state of Texas, which basically said that it might be a burden in the state of Texas for people to have a voter ID, even though you could use one of 7 different forms of identification at the polling place. And so that's why on April 24th, if you want to go and find my Viewpoints commentary, I took from this article that appeared in the Washington Examiner that Andrew had pointed me to a while back, 24 things that require a photo ID, and it had kind of funny pictures with each one of those. And just to remind you, it says, again, you cannot buy alcohol without an ID. I think that's pretty obvious. If you're under 27 years of age and want to buy cigarettes, you will be asked for an ID in most states. You need an ID to open a bank account. You need an ID to apply for food stamps and to apply for other welfare benefits, which I think leaves aside the idea that, well, the poor can't get an ID. The poor need an ID to get food stamps and welfare benefits, right? You need an ID to apply for Medicaid. You need an ID to apply for Social Security. You need an ID to apply for a job and to apply for unemployment. You need an ID to rent or buy a house or to apply for a mortgage. You need an ID to rent a car or even to buy a car. Of course, you need a driver's license to drive a car. You need an ID to get on an airplane. You need an ID to get married. You need an ID to buy a gun. You need an ID to apply for a hunting license. You need an ID to apply for a fishing license. You need an ID to rent a hotel room. You need an ID to buy a cell phone. You need an ID to pick up a prescription or even buy certain kinds of cold medications. You need an ID to give a blood transfusion. Do you get the idea? This idea that this is somehow discriminatory or it's used with almost surgical precision, that was their line, to actually discriminate against African Americans is ludicrous. But it brings me to one other piece I wanted to bring up, and then we'll get into some other issues. By the way, if you'd like to join us, what are your thoughts about a voter ID? Supreme Court today decided not to hear a case that might clarify once and for all about the value of photo ID for voting, but nevertheless did not decide to do that. And we've had a number of cases that have come from different district court judges and even appeal court judges saying that this cannot be used. And so I bring now to this piece that appeared today in National Review by John Fund. And he points out that one of the other criticisms that's now surfacing is because President Trump has put together what's called a bipartisan commission to investigate voter irregularities and fraud. It's called the Election Integrity Commission. Now, there are a number of people that have said, okay, maybe we haven't necessarily had 3 to 5 million illegal votes. That's, I think, a little bit of President Trump's hyperbole. But nevertheless, why not have a commission to check out whether or not we have some of these voter irregularities, given the fact that in certain states, people have been sentenced to jail, some for sentenced to prison for violating voter rules, and yet nevertheless the reaction has been amazing. John Fund says that Britain's Guardian newspaper declares the notion of a commission to be nothing more than a white power grab designed to reduce minority vote turnout. It also said that appointing the Secretary of State from Kansas, Chris Kobach, who's been on the program with us before, to be the vice chairman of a group examining voter integrity was like Hitler asking Goebbels to put out the Reichstag fire, which, first of all, probably doesn't connect with some people that don't know their history. You also have an individual with ACLU's Voting Rights Project saying the American people should demand that elected officials and election administrators not participate in this commission. And so there are all sorts of people that have reacted to it. And what John Fund has pointed out is we have quite a number of individuals. For example, I just mentioned Chris Kobach in Kansas. Those of you in Kansas know him as Secretary of State. He actually has been able to pursue 9 different cases just in Kansas alone of voter fraud. In one, Kansas County began offering voter registration at naturalization ceremonies. This is where then, if you want to become a citizen, we're going to give you a voter card just the moment you walk out the door. And oftentimes the argument is we should actually provide universal voting rights for individuals so that they don't even have to be troubled to walk across the street or get in their car and go to a place to actually get this. And of course, there's the motor voter law, which allows you to get a voter card while you get your driver's license. And so if anything, there are just a lot of opportunities for mischief. And so that's certainly one of those issues. And again, the criticism that has come is that this is all a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. But now that we've had a number of these prosecutions, we're starting to see that it's moving from, well, there's no voter fraud to, well, it's unlikely that they're going to find too many problems, and we shouldn't have commissioners spending the time going through all these databases to determine if we have individuals who are voting here illegally. So the fact that we've moved at least from, well, there's no voter fraud, which is a little harder to make the case for, given the fact that you have individuals that have been sentenced to either short jail time or sometimes prison time for jail fraud. Now the argument is being, well, we really don't need to burden these various counties with individuals checking out the databases and to see what is taking place. As we've pointed out in this program so many times before, there are all sorts of dead people that have voted time and time again, very easily to determine, because you can go and see who is no longer living, and you can see that those same individuals, theoretically, who are no longer living, actually voted in the last 4 elections. So that kind of existence takes place. Then you have all sorts of irregularities with these absentee ballots, and then many other issues that certainly are meriting our case. So if nothing else, I understand maybe why the Supreme Court decided not to take this important case out of North Carolina, which could once and for all determine and establish the value of voter ID laws. I hope that in the future it takes some case, maybe a better case, maybe one that is being pursued from one other state, so that we could resolve some of the kinds of comments that are being made. And of course, if you don't think that there are people that are opposing looking into voter IDs, look at all of the statements being made right now of President Trump's Election Integrity Commission, which is given the task of seeing how much integrity and how much irregularity we have in our voting rules. So if we can, let's take a break. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Do you think we need voter IDs? And if so, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll get into a couple of other issues in the news, but I was disappointed today to hear that the Supreme Court decided not to take a case that could have resolved this once and for all. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On our last episode, we discussed the religious test clause found in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Today, I'd like to discuss the clause just before it, the Oaths Clause. In practical terms, the Oaths Clause required federal officials to be bound to their office with an oath or affirmation that they would support the Constitution. Most immediately, that language came in stark contrast to the oath the new Americans once swore to England's king. No longer would Americans swear allegiance to a single human. Rather, their duty in office would be in service and support of the Constitution and, by extension, to the "we the people" mentioned in its preamble. You probably understand the part about oaths, but why did the framers insert the "or affirmation" part? Well, the answer reveals our country's commitment to recognizing that its government should neither compel nor compromise the religious conscience of its citizens. Some religious beliefs prevent the taking of oaths of any kind, save an oath to God alone. It may seem insignificant upon first glance, but by inserting the word "or" in the Oaths Clause and giving the option to affirm support of the Constitution, the framers made the official policy of the United States that it would show deference to the religious conscience of its citizens. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes before we get to the top of the hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I've talked about one case that concerns me. Of course, it was a decision not to decide. So, of course, we don't have any real ruling. In just a minute, I'll talk about a court case that I feel very good about. So we'll talk about some positives and some negatives. But let's go to the phones first. Brenda in Georgia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think the Supreme Court should hear this case, and if it don't, they're not hearing it now, but they need to definitely hear it before the next national election. And I live in Georgia, and I've always had to show an ID. And the ID had to match my address to the precinct where I voted at, and that should be the same for all over the country.
You know, and Georgia is a perfect example of the point I was making just a few minutes ago. That is, when you actually had that requirement to have a voter ID, the argument that came from some of the individuals in your legislature was that this will depress minority voting. What actually happened is it actually increased minority voting. Now, to be fair, some of that might have been because in one of those elections you had Barack Obama running for election for president, so that might have drawn it out. But the point was that even in one where he was not on the ballot, you had an increase. So it didn't depress minority voting. It actually increased it. And so the argument that is used time and time again actually is contradicted by the facts. So if nothing else, I think Georgia is a great example, probably one of the better examples around the country. There's a few others in which voter IDs have actually been a very positive change and maybe cleared up some of these, what I call voter irregularities. So thank you for sharing that today.
Okay, and I agree with you 100%.
Let's, if we can, also mention one other issue, that is that some people have made the case, and I need to find this video. I think it's probably on YouTube, but I'm going to have to figure out the right search engine to find it. I'd seen this a while back where this one particular group that was looking for voter integrity went into, and I believe it was Harlem, of all places, and they asked, first of all, various people that were white, and maybe around, say, Columbia University. Do you think it's difficult for African Americans to get ID so that they could actually vote? And you just had, bleeding heart liberal after bleeding heart liberal American, white Americans saying, yeah, it's probably real difficult for them to get an ID, and so this is why we just can't have voter ID laws. And then they go just down, a couple of blocks to Harlem, talking to African Americans, and they say, now, is it hard for you or other friends of yours to get an ID? And they're going, no, what do you mean? And after they'd ask about the third person, they were actually offended by the question, because the question implied that, I guess African Americans can't get an ID or something like that. And I thought it was just a good illustration that sometimes these arguments that are being used against a voter ID, if there's ever an argument, it's not that voter ID would suppress minority voting and is racist. It's that the mindset or even kind of the argumentation is racist. It implies that individuals that are minorities, whether they're African American, Hispanic American, whatever they might be, can't get an ID. Really? What planet do you live in? And as I shared just earlier, you can't really function in this country any longer without having a photo ID. You can't get on an airplane. You can't rent videos. You can't even apply for food stamps and other welfare benefits. You can't apply for Medicaid and Social Security without at least some kind of ID. And given the fact that recently in Texas, the particular district judge, it was pretty liberal, by the way, voted it down, actually struck it down when you could use one of 7 different forms of identification. And of course, in most of those states, if you don't have identification, then you can still vote, but you have to fill out an affidavit, and so they'll keep that off to the side and count it if you can then validate what you've done. So it doesn't say you can't vote. It just simply says you might get a provisional ballot, which we would add as soon as you could provide any kind of identification. So that's really not the issue. And I think really what the issue is that one party recognizes how much they benefit from individuals who can vote twice or vote for other individuals or manipulate the voter rolls. And again, it's not so much who votes, it's who counts the votes and who is able to stuff the ballot box that I think is really at stake there. But nevertheless, we'll see what the Supreme Court does, and we'll get back to some of those issues as the week unfolds. But I thought, since we've talked about some cases that we're concerned about, let me talk about another victory. And this one came from a Kentucky court that ruled that a print shop does not have to make gay pride T-shirts. Now, the dispute arose a while back, a couple of years ago, when the Gay and Lesbian Services Organization asked this print shop called Hands On Original to make T-shirts with the name and logo of the Pride Festival. Well, the owner, Brian Adamson, said he didn't want to print those because it violated his policy of not printing messages that endorse a position in conflict with his convictions. Now, what he did was actually refer them to a print shop that actually did print those T-shirts, but that didn't keep the LGBT advocates from filing a complaint with the County Human Rights Commission, and they argued that he was discriminating against the homosexual group. Now, he did point out that there have been other times that he'd refused to print T-shirts and other things. One time, that's because it included an offensive word. I won't say that word over radio, but you can look it up if you want. Another was where there was a depiction of Jesus dressed as a pirate, and so he turned those down too. So it wasn't like he only singled out homosexuals. As a matter of fact, it's worth mentioning he does business with the LGBT community, and he's even employed individuals who consider themselves to be homosexuals. But nevertheless, that's where the court, at least the lower court, said he was in violation of the local fairness ordinance. But the appeals court actually was ruling that no, he did not have to do so. So this, I think, was very good. And it just, I think, is encouraging because think about this. We wouldn't demand that a print shop, say, owned by a vegetarian, would be forced to print flyers for the Cattlemen's Association. We wouldn't expect a print shop owned, say, by an African American to print posters for a white supremacist group. But, of course, that rarely happens for two reasons. Number one, if the print shop did decline to do that, the individuals would probably just go to another print shop and they wouldn't bother to file a complaint. And number two, most of the customers would probably avoid a print shop if, for example, they knew it was a vegetarian. They're not going to even try to get that printed there. But what happens here is the LGBT members specifically target Christian printers, Christian bakers, Christian florists, Christian photographers, because they want to create a problem and then report it to the local human rights organization. So if nothing else, Kentucky, 3 cheers for you, providing a court that would not force a print shop to actually print T-shirts that would violate some of his convictions, in this case, his religious convictions. Would that we have those kind of decisions coming in other places where photographers, florists, bakers, and others have been forced out of business. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be having a great conversation with Jim Paris. Jim Paris is, again, with Christian Money. We're going to spend some time talking about how you can make some money using the internet, how you can address some of the economic issues and financial issues that you've been dealing with. I appreciate his practical sense, and I like to bring him on from time to time, and since I knew he was going to be here in the Dallas area, we'll have him in studio. Let me also commend to you some of the articles that we've posted today. Wayne Pederson, of course, we have the information about the International Day of Unreached People. My commentary today is entitled Jumping Off Sides. It really has to do with how Brett Stevens caused some people to rethink this whole issue of climate change. And, of course, if you would like to join with us on the Truth Team, we have that banner so that you can support this ministry. Let's take a break. We'll come back with Jim Paris in studio right after this.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, well, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to really talk about some very practical ways for you to deal with your finances. And we have in studio, as I've already talked about, James L. Paris. Now, for some of you that have been listening to Point of View for some time, you're going to say, now that is a name out of the past, because this is an individual that, first of all, was on the program quite often with Marlon Maddox and with me. He actually sat in this chair here as a co-host or a guest host on a number of occasions, had a program called Christian Money, and the fact that you were going to be in Dallas today, I just had to have you in studio.
It's so good to be here, and I have to tell you, the first time that I was on Point of View, which I think goes all the way back to like 1991. So I was on Point of View, and I was just a guest, and I had written a little book called Financial Boot Camp.
Right.
And Marlon had me on for the 2 hours, and after the show was over, about 5 minutes later, my phone rings, and it's the booming voice of Marlon Maddox calling me. And at that time, I didn't know Marlon.
Yeah.
I just was
you
like,
just by phone. Yeah.
wow, this radio guy is calling me. And he calls me and he says, Jim, I want to tell you, I've been doing radio for many years. And he says, I don't know that anyone has gotten quite the reaction that you've gotten. I want to make plans for you to come to Dallas.
Yeah.
And I ended up a couple weeks later, flew to Dallas.
That's when we all got to meet you face to face.
I was in the studio,
Yeah.
and then it just, the relationship just exploded. I don't know how many times I was on this show. I ended up guest hosting a number of times, and co-hosting, and on all these different conventions, NRB, NAB, all, Religious Broadcasters Convention, Christian Booksellers, all these conventions I would go. Marlon would be there and set up the whole big thing, and he'd have me come and sit with him. And some of the people that would sit down with us, I mean, some of the big names, Oliver North, I mean, just people, and Marlon knew all these people. And I remember the first time I met Marlon in person, he had, this tremendous booming voice. I walked up to him, I shook his hand, and he said, I'm Marlon Maddox. And he said, I'm not as tall as my voice, am I? Because, he's about my height, about 5'5", 5'6", and has this big booming voice.
That big Marlon Maddox voice.
And I thought that was just a tremendous opening line. But I love you guys. I'm so glad to be here. It brings back so many incredible memories.
Let me just introduce you to some of the individuals that are meeting you for the first time. And first of all, I've said before you came on the program, one of the things I always loved about you, Jim, is that we'll have people in like Crown Financial, or back in the old days was called Christian Financial Concepts, and they'll say, well, you need to get out of debt. But Jim Paris would say, yeah, but if you're in debt and you got credit card debt, here's a place where you can get a credit card with a lower interest. Or, they'll say, well, you need to tighten your belt. And some of these people saying, I've tightened it all that I can. And you said, well, have you ever thought about ways that you could raise money as a second income on the internet? And you just full of really practical stuff.
I always said that,
and that's why the phones always rang.
I always said that Larry Burkett, who I loved and I met on many occasions, and his organization that still goes on today, I always said that their ministry was more what to do, and that I felt like my ministry was more how to do it.
Yes.
So like to really drill down and give people the website, the phone number, the steps, so that they could actually do some of those things and make it super practical. That was always my goal.
One of the things we've done here is we got a picture of Jim Paris. Of course, you can watch it online here, so you may want to do that. But we have a link to christianmoney.com, and you can go there and find some of his information. But again, you mentioned the financial boot camp, but money money management for those that don't have any, living financially free, the 10-day financial breakthrough, Christian financial crisis, all sorts of great material that's all at your website. And I thought we'd just get into a few. They gave me some ideas, and the first one that's got my attention, you have this story in your blog about a grandmother who paid for a trip to Disney with her grandson by completing online surveys. Tell me about that.
Right.
People can make money just by doing online surveys.
Right. So, and by the way, my blog is totally searchable. So if you need to find something that I talked about, you can go to the right-hand sidebar, type in the word, and you'll find it. Okay, so what this grandmother did was she used a site called swagbucks.com. That's SWAGBUCKS.com. And I had heard of swagbucks.com, but I wasn't really all that, interested in it because, you can make $5 extra or $10 extra. We don't really cover things like that. It's not really enough to really change anybody's life. But when we saw this story where this grandmother, she goes to swagbucks.com, she sets up an account, and she ends up doing these little activities, which you can watch videos and earn points. You can complete surveys and earn points. You can be part of a focus group and earn points. You can click on different links they have. So you're going to buy something at Best Buy. Instead of just going to Best Buy's website, you first go to Swagbucks. You click on the Best Buy link, and then you get points for buying through that link. Everything's the same. The price is the same, etc. You just get points generated by doing that. So by playing this little game on swagbucks.com, she ends up funding an entire trip to Disney World for her, the grandmother, her husband, who's the grandfather, and the grandson. And they end up with like $450 in gift cards after they get to Disney World, which represents their spending money. So we started looking into this Swagbucks, and we were looking at this. So I set up a Swagbucks, started messing around with it, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty amazing, because if you're like standing in line at the grocery store, you have dead time, or you're stuck in your, the waiting room at your doctor's or wherever you're at, you're waiting for the kids to come out of karate and you're sitting in the car's idling, you can do these little things and make money. And so we didn't find that many stories of people making this much as this grandmother did. However, we found so many stories of people saying that this pays for their Christmas each year.
Right.
They do the swag bucks all throughout the year, and then at the end of the year, when Christmas comes, they cash all of those points in for gift cards to buy all the Christmas gifts. And I thought, wow, well, if that's all people did with it, is it funded Christmas? Whenever I say things like that, I get the emails, Christians shouldn't be making Christmas about buying gifts. Okay, I get that. But some of you will. So for those that do buy gifts at Christmas and make it about that or partially about that, This is a way maybe you can pay for your Christmas by doing this little Swagbucks thing. So we do have a big article about it, and there's a link in there to set up your own Swagbucks. A pretty fun idea.
Well, again, it's a Christian money. And when we come back, I wanted to do a little bit more, because you have some other places where people can make money. You also have the idea that maybe you could get a free home phone, or a way that you could maybe reduce your phone costs with a prepaid cell phone, just all sorts of things. And again, that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Jim, is that you recognize that if people are in debt, here's some ways to begin to consolidate that debt or reduce that. But in many cases, you've come to find that it isn't that people are spending too much, it's they're making too little. And in this economy, maybe a second source or stream of income is something that you've been working about. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's spend some time getting into a few more of those issues. And we're going to talk about Bitcoins, and we're going to talk about how to find the cheapest airplane flight, and maybe even begin to think about some of the kinds of sources of income that could come to you. And as you go to the website, pointofview.net, it will take you to christianmoney.com, or you can go there directly. Of course, he has an email newsletter. He has his blog, and that's where you, as you said, can search for all of that information. You can learn a little bit more about financial freedom. And later, we're going to open up the phones, because I know some of you have some ideas, or you say, I've got this idea, but I don't know how to use the internet to actually use that to generate some income. And this is one guy that has, over the years, figured out all sorts of ways to really help you be more successful financially. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jim Paris, and then we'll open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about that with him and then with you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When Brett Stevens wrote his first column to the New York Times last month, he caused quite a stir. If writing a column could be compared to a football game, Stevens was a smart quarterback who caused the opposition to jump off sides. The title of the column was The Climate of Certainty. He began by reminding us that most pundits were certain that Hillary Clinton would be our next president. He also reminded us that the campaign placed too much faith in the power of models and algorithms. He concluded that there's a lesson to this. He said, we live in a world in which data conveys authority. But authority has a way of descending into certitude, and certitude begets hubris. Then he turned to the subject of climate change. When he applied some of the same lessons to that scientific discussion and debate, he acknowledged that you can almost hear the heads exploding. He was correct. Heads did explode. Twitter comments came fast and furious. There was a campaign to cancel subscriptions to the New York Times. In his column, he makes it clear that he does not deny climate change or the possibility of the severity of its consequences, but he says ordinary citizens have the right to be skeptical of an overweening scientism. That didn't stop critics from completely misrepresenting what he wrote. The headline in Slate said that the column was classic climate change denialism. Think about that. A columnist who does not deny climate change is still charged with being a climate change denier. The reaction to his column proves his point. Stevens was calling for humility and warning about hubris. The Twitter posts, the angry letters to the editor, the campaign to cancel subscriptions, and the misrepresentation of his position illustrate the stridency and illogic of the other side. His column forced liberals to jump off sides. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Jim Paris. You can watch us online or listen to this, and you might want to listen to it again as he begins to talk about different ways that you can earn income. So we'll talk about earning income, then we'll talk about cutting costs. But one of those is that there are all sorts of opportunities for people to work from home. And one of the things you wrote about recently is Amazon is hiring thousands of people to work from home. What's that all about?
So when we, in the past, would talk about work from home, it was like all the bells and whistles would go off, like scam alert, work from home.
Yeah.
There are obviously ways you can start a business working from home. And yes, there are a lot of scams that promise you can stuff envelopes or address labels and work from home. But now these big companies, and Amazon isn't the only one. Some of the articles, we've mentioned some of the other companies, but these are big companies like Amazon that hire you, and you actually are an employee. In many cases, you are entitled to all the benefits and everything else as an employee. And what they do is with this, really incredible technology, you're able to go into a spare bedroom in your house, close the door, log into a computer, and all of a sudden, now you're on a headset and you're a customer service for Amazon. And it's not just Amazon. There's companies like 800 Flowers that are doing this. So what they're doing is they're gaining the benefit of not having to set up a big physical footprint somewhere to have a call center by letting people work from home. And then the benefit to the person working from home is maybe you have children and you don't want to leave the home, or maybe you live in an area where it wouldn't be convenient for you to commute, or you just sat down and with a sharp pencil and figured out, you know what, for me to drive an hour each way with the wear and tear on my car and gas and oil changes and everything else, I can't afford to go into the big city to work, or you don't want to just sit in traffic all day. So these jobs, these are real jobs with real benefits, and they're popping up all around the country. A website I really love is the Penny Hoarder.
Mm-hmm.
thepennyhoarder.com.
I've heard about that, yes.
Yeah, so they've got an article that I just saw they put up last week about just a tremendous number of jobs opening up for people to work from home in South Carolina. But in all these different areas, and these are real jobs. You get a real paycheck. You're a real employee with access to the benefits and so forth. And in some cases, they might say you've got to come in initially to be trained, maybe for a few days or a few weeks. And then maybe you've got to come in once or twice a month for meetings or whatnot. But just this idea, this technology, Kirby, that you can put on a headset, log in on your computer. And if you have an internet connection, now all of a sudden you are Amazon's customer service rep and you're being routed phone calls. I just love this idea. And it really says so much about the future, that people are getting away from traditional jobs and people are looking for ways to kind of reinvent their life. And maybe you've always wanted to live out in the country, but you couldn't because you were kind of tied to a job. So many people are leaving big cities because it's so much cost to live in a big city, like where I grew up in Chicago. My aunt, who has kind of a medium lower class type home, middle class home, she's paying $6,000-$7,000 a year in property taxes, even though her house is paid off. Just to keep her house, she has to pay $6,000-$7,000 a year. So people are getting away from these big cities and looking for alternative opportunities. And Amazon is just one of many companies now hiring people legit, salaried, work from home. Opportunities.
What about some of these entrepreneurs? We had somebody call in the other day when we were doing a program that was sort of like this and saying, I've got a horticulture business, but I don't know what to do with it. And so one of my guests said, well, have you ever thought about going online and giving advice to individuals and having, your own website? And of course, now even with Facebook, you don't even have to have your own website, but certainly it'd be better to have your own website. And you have certain paid ads and things like that. That is something you've talked about in the past. So if somebody has this area of expertise, instead of just having the opportunity to reach the people in their zip code, with the internet, you can reach anybody across the country, around the world.
I've been going around the country doing these workshops, and one of the workshops that I just did, this same exact thing came up. Somebody with an expertise, it wasn't exactly this, but how do they monetize it? That's the term that we use. Mm-hmm. And so what people are doing is, when you look at retirement, this is a number that'll blow your mind. So if you want to take a 1% CD and use that as your retirement vehicle, Kirby, you need to come up with, here's a number, drum roll, $5 million to save up to get $50,000 a year if you make 1%. So somebody might say, well, that's a little bit unrealistic, Jim Paris. Maybe I can make 4%. So if you make 4%, then the good news is you only need to come up with like $1.25 million for you to be able to retire and get that $50,000 a year. So what people are doing, and what I've been super excited about, is teaching people about developing these multiple streams of cash flow or income. Mm-hmm. So if we run the numbers backwards and we say, if you start a little business, let's say it's a blog or a website, maybe you go to a website called Udemy, that's Udemy, and you start teaching an online course about horticulture or whatever the topic is. Sure. And let's say this little thing you have going starts producing $100 a month for you. Well, if we run the numbers backwards and we say, what is that $100 a month worth in terms of a lump sum in a CD? So that $100 a month that you have coming in is the same as if you had $120,000 in a CD at 1%. Or if you want to compare it to a 4% investment, that's the same as if you had saved up $30,000.
Yes.
So when I share this in my seminars, people they look at me like, wow, so I could start a little thing and it's producing a couple $100 a month. That's like having $240,000 over at the bank at 1%. So what people are doing now is they're creating what we call virtual real estate.
Right.
This intellectual property, whether it's you're going to write an ebook that produces $100 a month, which is super easy to do with Amazon, or you're going to start a website and there's different advertising programs you could put on a website to create an income from it, or teach an online course or start a blog. So people are doing all these different kinds of things. And we've said for years, why not have 3 to 5 little things going, so that maybe someday those little things are medium things or even big things, so that when you get to your retirement years, it's not just your Social Security and not just the little trickle from your investments, Because most people have given up on retirement, honestly.
They
People
certainly
I've
have.
talked to, they've said,
Yeah.
you know what, I'm not going to have that $1 million. I'm not going to have that $5 million for whatever the reason, and the companies are not paying these pensions anymore. And I've got relatives in Illinois that are in the teachers' pension fund, which is 50%
Oh, can't even imagine.
underfunded.
Yeah.
Don't even get you started on that.
Illinois,
So these little things that people are doing, you can start with virtually no money and get $100 a month coming in or $200 a month. And the idea would be that at some point in time that would grow to even be more and sort of become a passive income source for you. I love to write books, so I just recently met with my lawyers a year ago and put one of my books, which is doing extremely well, How to Pray for a Financial Miracle. That book has sort of become like the book for me.
Yeah.
And I put the rights to it in my trust. So that, even when I die, this is the really neat thing is even when you die, if you set these different streams of income up right, this can pass on to your family.
Kids, yeah.
So if you're thinking in terms of a legacy, not just for yourself and your spouse, but maybe your legacy, this is a way you could leave maybe money for family, children, grandchildren, and pay for future generations.
Very good. Just before I take a break, let's talk about saving some money. We talk about making some money. You talk about there are ways you could get a free home phone, a way that you could get no longer have to pay for cable TV. What about that?
Yeah. So like two big things you could do. So for most people, this is probably going to save you $200 to $300 a month. These two things right here. Nobody should have cable TV anymore. Nobody should have it. So I'm sorry if you're listening, you work for cable. Sorry. Nobody should have cable TV anymore because you can get a Roku box and you can sign up for a subscription for something called Sling TV.
Right.
And I've been doing Roku for almost 5 years now, and I dropped cable. And back then it was sort of patchwork to get it to get all the channels you wanted. But now with Sling TV for $20 a month, Kirby, you can get the live news channels, you can get the sports channels, all of this stuff. If you want to get, some of this more specialized channels or extra sports channels, you pay an extra $5. So you can get rid of all that, and you can get like Hulu or Netflix to add on there. And if you have Amazon Prime, you end up maybe $30-$40 a month, and you have like everything you ever need. You don't need cable. MA. Go to Amazon, buy an UMA device. It's under $100, one-time cost. Plug it into your internet, and then you simply plug in your phone to it. Or you can plug it into your phone jack in your house. It lights up all your phone jacks in your house. It's free home phone for life. You can switch your phone number to it, and you can use 911 locator service on it, call waiting, voicemail, all the features you already have right now on your phone, but it's free. The only cost is that the government will charge you a tax of about $3 a month, believe it or not. A free phone has tax.
Yeah.
$3 a month for your free phone. I've had an UMA for 5 years, never had any trouble with it. In fact, when I do national radio shows on my UMA phone, they ask me, what in the world are you calling us on? We've never heard this clear of a connection.
There you go.
It is better than a phone in terms of the quality, and it's free. UMA, O-O-M-A.
Well, again, we're going to take a break. That just gives you a little bit of a taste for the kinds of wonderful, practical advice that you can get from Jim Paris. So if you'd like to join our conversation, maybe you have some questions, 1-800-351-1212. We've talked about how to make money. We've talked about how to get a free home phone. We've talked about how to no longer pay for cable. How about getting cheaper flights and maybe finding a smart way to pay for college without debt? We got a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at inourhands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jim Paris in studio with us. Again, we have a link to christianmoney.com. You can find out more about some of the things that he is offering, some of his books, his blog, and much more. Let's take some phone calls. We'll go first to Georgia. Deborah, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your question?
I was looking at, I have one rental property, and then I have a personal home. I'm a single woman. And this is my source of income coming in along with my family settlement. And I was wondering about buying more rental property. I have a couple of $100,000 plus a couple of $100,000 coming in each month until I'm 65.
Wow, you have $200,000 a month coming in?
A year, I'm sorry.
A year, okay. All right, well, wow, sounds like you're in a really good position. Let me say, I do like rental properties. I think real estate is a good long-term investment. I also think there's some great, tax benefits of owning real estate. However, you've got to really be smart and know what you're doing. It's not as easy as if you already own one rental property. It's not as easy as they present it to be in these TV infomercials. So one thing to look at is I look at population flows. So take a look at the area that you're planning to buy the rental property in, and just take a look at the trend of real estate prices and also the population flow. For example, we were talking earlier in the show about Chicago, and Chicago has a net outflow of people, which would make me I would be very skittish about buying real estate in Chicago, even though the trend is good. It's still going up in value somehow. But it's kind of like that Roadrunner cartoon. The Wile E. Coyote, he doesn't fall until he looks down after he's over the cliff. So sometimes it's a little bit of psychology. But as long as you know what you're doing and you're careful and you have good reserves, always keep some money back and plan for worst case scenarios like a tenant not paying you and having to go through maybe a lengthy eviction process, or maybe they do some tremendous damage to the property. But, all those warnings and caveats, I like in general rental real estate as a good long-term investment.
I'm just thinking that some people might like to meet you face-to-face. And, of course, you're in Dallas because you just did a seminar in Dallas. Aren't you doing one in Houston tomorrow?
Yes, yeah. I am.
And you have others that people can go to, right?
Right. Well, I'm in the middle of this tour, so the next thing I'm going to do, I don't have the dates nailed down yet, but the next dates are going to be on the West Coast.
Oh, good.
So I'll be in Los Angeles and San Francisco area, probably outside of San Francisco, just because I don't love inside of San Francisco. But
and we have listeners in California that would love to come and meet you.
In Stockton, I've got a huge amount of people
we've got
from
lots
back
of
in the day when I used to come on this show. There's a station in KYCC, I think.
That's
in
right.
Stockton.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to be in Houston tomorrow.
Yes.
So for people that want to come and meet me, it's free. I'm going to do a 3-hour workshop just talking about all this kind of stuff, and people can ask questions, and it's free. And where it is, it's at the Ramada Inn. It's at the Intercontinental Airport East, the Ramada East Intercontinental Airport. So if you don't remember all that, it's on my website, christianmoney.com. It's free. We're going to open up the doors at 6, and we go from 6:30 to 9:30, and I talk for about 45 minutes, and then we just say, you decide what you want to talk about, anything you want to talk about. So every workshop kind of takes on its own direction. Some of them, a lot of it is about like Bitcoin, which is really hot right now. Sometimes it's about real estate investing and some strategy. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything in my life and made a lot of money and lost a lot of money. So I sort of have a story or some insight on just about anything to do with making or saving money.
That's very good. So again, if you'd like to maybe schedule him to come to hear you in Georgia or wherever we might be, we're in 42 different states, so we could keep you busy if you would.
Yeah, I'll go anywhere and any church, anywhere. All I ask is they just pay my travel. Yeah. I don't charge any speaking fees or anything.
Well, again,
I'd love
you
to.
mentioned Bitcoin. Let's talk about that for a minute, because you think that everyone should own Bitcoin, and I'm thinking, well, the only reason I'm hearing about Bitcoin is that right now they have the ransom. We have these big problems with the internet right now, and they're saying that you have to get your computer out of hock by paying Bitcoin.
The WannaCry virus.
Yes.
So Bitcoin.
What is that? Yeah.
Bitcoin has a dark side to it, which is that many times people that are involved with illegal things will use Bitcoin as a way of transacting those payments. But it's sort of like the early days of the internet. When I first started teaching Christians how to set up websites and blogs and all that, the response I got was no, that the internet is an ungodly place. It's all about pornography and gambling. And it is true that those terrible things are there, but at the same time, you can use the internet for good. In fact, I'll tell you that pointofview.net, I'm the guy that got that domain name from Marlon Maddox years ago. And he said, we'll never use it, because our people don't go online. But if you want to reserve it for us and transfer the name over to us, I would appreciate it. So I did.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't know how many years ago, like in the late 90s. But in any case, Bitcoin, a lot of Christians are interested in Bitcoin. And there's 4 or 5 other digital currencies that we follow as well. So let me tell you a couple of quick things about Bitcoin. One is this Christian family got in touch with me. They're from the West Coast, and they told me they started buying Bitcoin when it was below 1 penny. And this was about 3 years ago. They sold all of their Bitcoin, and they cashed in over $1 million. They paid off their mortgage, their house, all their cars. Everything was paid off, and they still had $500,000 they ended up putting into other investments. So at the time, this was 5 years ago when I first started looking at Bitcoin, and it was a year after that I met these folks. But I wrote an article about this in October of 2012. And Bitcoin was at $12. So I said, well, I'm writing this article. I should probably put a little bit of money in here. So I went up to the bank and I did the transaction, $20. And I bought what was like 1.5 Bitcoin when it was trading at $12. So it's presently at $1,800.
Yes.
So here's the thing. A lot of people have reasons that they don't like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's kind of a neutral thing. It could be used for good things, for bad things, or whatever. It's a tremendous technology. There's only going to be a maximum number of Bitcoin that will ever be available in circulation. I think the number is something like 20 million. So once that is hit, the price will go up because the supply is going to be limited.
Supply and demand.
So we have something that was very obscure, that was worth less than a penny, that's presently worth $1,800. There are tens of thousands of Bitcoin ATMs all around the world. You can buy plane tickets with Bitcoin. You can buy things on Amazon, Overstock.com. So here's my idea. I said this in one of my workshops, and then I said it on my own radio show. I think every Christian should put $100 in Bitcoin and forget about it. Put it in there, forget about it. Here's what could happen. So kind of the top guy in Bitcoin, they call him the Bitcoin evangelist. His name is Roger Ver, V-E-R. He's been on my radio show. He is predicting a value of Bitcoin of somewhere above $2 million. So I ran the math and I said, well, what if you put $100 in today and it actually went over $2 million? What would your $100 be worth? It would be worth over $100,000. $100. So it's one of those things where, some people have said, oh, it's like gambling. You're telling people I don't put any serious amount of money in because I don't really know what's going to happen. I just know that something is happening with this thing. And a lot of people don't really even know about what's happening right now. They've never heard of it. And once the average person, this is like I said about Facebook, once your grandmother starts posting to Facebook, maybe the growth curve for Facebook is over. So once your grandma tells you to buy Bitcoin, it may be too late. So this is maybe the time to get in before it gets to that point. Wall Street isn't getting involved in this, Kirby. So Wall Street is in a process right now. There are several applications pending with the Securities and Exchange Commission to make Bitcoin a publicly traded a commodity so that it could be in mutual funds and IRA accounts. And that's going to happen probably, they think, this year. And once that happens, then it's sort of like Katie bar the door, because then you'll have really hundreds and millions of dollars pouring in to Bitcoin that way. So I love Bitcoin, but don't bet the farm on it. $100, no more than that.
Let's take another phone call. We'll head to North Carolina. Sarah, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Jim Paris.
Hi, Mr. Paris. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you.
I wanted to know what you would recommend for an Internet provider. The area that I live in is a relatively small area, and what seems to be the most reliable is the cable connection for the Internet. We do have a couple other alternatives, but they aren't very reliable, and as everything else is, the prices keep going.
So let me quickly say this before the break. Internet service providers are local, so it's tough to give like a national recommendation, but something to look at, Kirby, and for this caller, is satellite internet is exploding. Mm-hmm. This is where you're going to see, just like what happened with Dish, what Dish did to cable TV, this is what's about to happen to the local cable companies being sort of the sole franchise owner of the good internet connection. You're going to be able to put a dish in your backyard soon and get that super high high-speed internet for a fraction of what the cable company is going to charge you. So look for that. I don't have a good idea for you today, but that's coming very, very soon.
Well, and again, if you find some more, you can find it at christianmoney.com,
yes, sir.
Right? So I know you'll be researching that. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212 right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On our last episode, we discussed the religious test clause found in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Today, I'd like to discuss the clause just before it, the Oaths Clause. In practical terms, the Oaths Clause required federal officials to be bound to their office with an oath or affirmation that they would support the Constitution. Most immediately, that language came in stark contrast to the oath the new Americans once swore to England's king. No longer would Americans swear allegiance to a single human. Rather, their duty in office would be in service and support of the Constitution and, by extension, to the "we the people" mentioned in its preamble. You probably understand the part about oaths, but why did the framers insert the "or affirmation" part? Well, the answer reveals our country's commitment to recognizing that its government should neither compel nor compromise the religious conscience of its citizens. Some religious beliefs prevent the taking of oaths of any kind, save an oath to God alone. It may seem insignificant upon first glance, but by inserting the word "or" in the Oaths Clause and giving the option to affirm support of the Constitution, the framers made the official policy of the United States that it would show deference to the religious conscience of its citizens. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jim Pearson in studio with us for a few more minutes. Again, I will commend to you christianmoney.com. Go to that website. But I thought since we've been talking about saving money, there were a couple I mentioned we didn't get to. We talked about the free home phone. We talked about cable. Another one that came to mind is you've helped us find the cheapest flight. That's an interesting one because some of our listeners are flying, and if you can find the cheapest flight in less than a minute, you must know something I don't know.
Yeah, so this is huge because if you want to be a financial rock star,
yes,
show your friends how to get the cheapest flight. And I've really mastered this. So my wife and I, we went to Italy last year, and so I did 7 days in Italy with round-trip airfare, my hotel, breakfast every morning, and my rental car. The entire cost of the trip was $1,600. The entire trip. Now, we spent money. We went, paid for some train rides and some souvenirs and nice dinners and all that. But I just found some flights for us to possibly go back to Italy in October. Round trip, the flights are going to be around $450 for the flights. So here's how you do it. The first thing is you have to be flexible on the departure airport and also flexible on the arrival airport, the destination airport. So pull out a map or look at the Google Flights. I love Google Flights. Look at their screen. And if you're flying to Chicago, don't just limit it to the 2 airports in Chicago. There are other airports like Milwaukee, which is only like an hour and a half drive away. So look at multiple airports. The same thing when you're flying to Europe. Look at multiple airports to go to and multiple airports to leave from. So that flight I just told you about, the Italy flight that I'm looking at, leaves out of Miami, which is a 4-hour drive for me, but it'll save me like $500 to fly out of there. So for each of us, so instead of it being like a $900 ticket, it's going to be, $400 ticket. So here's the deal. You go to Google Flights. You want to play with, they give you an option of playing with multiple different airports for your destination and your departure and your destination airports. But here's the trick that nobody knows. And if you if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll find this. If you go to my blog, you'll find this. There's a little tab after you do your search. You put in your dates and you do your search. Put in any dates. You could put like 7 days in there. It could be starting today, 7 days from now. It doesn't really matter. But once you get the date in there and you get the results, click on the little tab, and I show you how to do this in the video, where it's actually a little calendar icon. When you click on it, it brings up this bar graph that shows you, like, for a year out, all of the costs of the flights. And then when that bar graph is up, you can actually change the number of days of your trip and experiment with it, going back and forth. And you would be just shocked. The same exact itinerary from, let's say, Orlando to Chicago can range from like a $50 flight to $500, $600, just based on that graph. And so I show people how to do this and how to get to this tool inside of Google Flights, which people don't know about this tool. It is incredible because instead of having to manually keep trying all these different dates and then you get tired of it and you're like, okay, here's my credit card number, and you just buy one of them, you can actually have a lay of the land visual landscape for an entire year to see where the deal is. And then you just click on it and then you lock it in. And that's the trick. You can do that in less than 1 minute.
Oh, just fascinating. Lots of things to talk about. One more that I wanted to mention, we did talk about a smart way to pay for college without going into debt. And that was one that you've written about. And some of our listeners are about ready to send somebody off to college, and they're wondering, how am I going to pay for this?
Right. So we've done a number of radio shows, which are in our archives that people can listen to, all about this. But number one, do not send your young person off to a 4-year college right away. This is the biggest waste of money right off the top. Go to that local community type college. Let them get their 2-year associate degree. In Florida, where I live, high school kids can now dual enroll and get their associate's degree while they're attending high school, and the county is paying for that. That is a tremendous thing. Even if you don't go that route, don't go to the 4-year college until you complete the 2-year degree at the local college. Kids don't want to do this, okay? And so here's the thing. This is so sad. They're getting out of college with $100,000, in some cases $200,000 in debt.
Unbelievable.
And let me tell you, the worst part of it is it's not just their debt. In many cases, Kirby, the parents signed, and in other cases, the grandparents signed. And literally, the government, to collect that money, will even garnish your Social Security income to collect that money. So it is total insanity for a young person to go off and go into all that kind of debt. You don't have to get into any debt. Go to the community college first, pay out of pocket, go off to finish your degree. If you want to do that, take a few classes at a time, work, pay cash for your classes. Don't run up any debt. It can be done, and you will be so happy. Because think about this. Would you rather have your parents go into debt for $200,000 for you, or just give you $200,000? You could buy your house for cash, and then you could work at 7-Eleven selling Slurpees, and you'd still be better off. So the problem with these college degrees, and a lot of them go into the arts. It's like we read an article about this guy. He got a master's in puppetry. He's like $200,000 in debt, and Sesame Street wasn't hiring that year, so he joined that Occupy Wall Street group. He's all upset. I can do puppets, but I owe $250,000. What am I going to do here?
Unbelievable. Let's take one more phone call real quickly. We'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Volma, thank you for calling today.
Hi, Kirby. I love your program. I want to ask him about the Bitcoin. If there's a specific website that you go
Yeah. Okay. Bitcoin website.
Yeah. So if you want to buy Bitcoin, the easiest way to do it without getting scammed, if you go to christianmoney.com, you'll see a link towards the top of the page there. It says workshop notes. Those are the notes from the workshop that I've been teaching. If you click on that link, it will take you to a page of my notes from that workshop. And there's a link in there to a verified, bona fide, legal, ethical, safe place to buy Bitcoin. It's called Coinbase. Don't Google it because you might end up at the wrong place. So use that link and you will get to the right place. And you can use your bank account or a credit card or any number of ways to fund your account to buy your Bitcoin. You can buy as little as $5 if you just want to kind of just have a little bit in there and not too much.
She also wanted to know about where you would find information about working from home. Now, some of that's on your website, but are there places to go? Do you have links to those?
Right. So we do have several articles, but if you just do a search on Google, work from home jobs, or even if you go into like the monster.com type of employment sites, they actually have filters now where you can search for the work from home jobs, but be very careful because it might be a scam. So don't pay anybody any money to have a work from home job. That's not legitimate. And then stick with the big names, the Amazons, those kinds of companies, the 800 Flowers. Those are the good companies. But again, be careful. Don't give out your credit card number, anything like that, unless you're dealing with the actual big name company.
Just before we go, again, people could schedule you to come to their community. We've got a couple of calls here from North Carolina, Georgia, for example, and you're going to be in California. So if people want to come to one that's scheduled or schedule you, that's
just get in touch with me at christianmoney.com. My email is jim@christianmoney.com. And it's insane, but I still to this day answer every email personally that comes into my website. And sometimes when I'm on a big show like the 700 Club, thousands of emails come in, and I answer every single one personally. Jim@christianmoney.com. I will come to your church. I will come to your area. I don't charge a speaking fee. Just pay my travel, and I'll be happy to come. And I'll be in Houston tomorrow night, Tuesday night. Love to see you. The Houston Ramada Inn East at the Intercontinental Airport there.
And again, some of our listeners in California can hear you. And again, they can hear you on radio, Jim Paris Live with the Genesis Communications Network. And so again, great opportunity. It's kind of own home week. It's been a while since we've seen you.
It is so good to see you guys. I love you guys.
Yeah, so thanks for being in Dallas, and thank you for giving us pointofview.net.
Yes.
So that's the website.
The rest of the story.
That is the rest of the story. So if you want to know a little bit more about the two guests we've had on here, they're all available at our website, which is pointofview.net. We have the commentaries, all the links, and I hope that you've appreciated our conversation. We've got a lot more to cover tomorrow, and we're looking forward to that. But we've got to say goodbye for today. I want to thank Andrew, Alisa, and Shamila. We'll see you back here on Tuesday. See you then.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.